The satisfying sound of a satisfying man falling apart on live television. That is what happened the night Arnold Schwarzenegger stood in front of a camera, picked up a sword, and said something so calm, so measured, so devastatingly precise that Donald Trump had no idea how to respond. One immigrant, one blade, and a few sentences so sharp they cut deeper than anything Hollywood ever scripted. What Trump did next proved every single word right. The room was quiet at first. Not the kind of quiet that comes from emptiness, but the kind that comes from weight. Arnold Schwarzenegger stood alone in a wood-paneled room. No studio audience, no flashy set, no applause signs hanging from the ceiling. Just a man, a camera, and a sword mounted on the wall behind him. The lighting was warm but serious, casting long shadows across the shelves and the dark wood. Everything about the setting felt deliberate, stripped down, personal, like a man inviting you into his home to tell you something important. There were no producers whispering in earpieces, no teleprompters scrolling polished lines, no safety net of any kind. Just Arnold, standing the way he always stands, wide, grounded, unmovable, with the kind of stillness that only comes from a man who has spent a lifetime learning when not to move. Nobody watching that screen was prepared for what he was about to do. He didn't rush into it. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't perform the way politicians perform, with rehearsed fury and manufactured passion designed to look real on a 30-second clip. Instead, he reached behind him and lifted the sword off the wall. Not a prop, not a replica. A real blade, forged in fire, tempered by pressure, made stronger through conflict. He held it in front of the camera, the way a teacher holds up an example, steady, deliberate, wanting you to see it clearly before he explained what it meant. As an immigrant to this country, Schwarzenegger said, his voice low and even, that unmistakable accent wrapping around each word like gravel over steel. I would like to say a few words to my fellow Americans. The sentence landed softly, almost gently, but underneath it sat something enormous, because Arnold Schwarzenegger is not your typical celebrity with an opinion and a platform. He is a man who arrived in America in 1968 with almost nothing, who built himself into the most famous bodybuilder on the planet, who became one of the biggest movie stars in history, who governed the largest state in the nation, and who did all of it as an immigrant, as an outsider, as someone who chose this country and earned his place inside it brick by brick. When he says, "my fellow Americans," the phrase carries a weight that most people born here never have to think about. He looked directly into the camera and continued. President Trump sought to overturn the results of an election, he said. A fair election. He sought a coup by misleading people with lies. No decoration, no softening, no careful political language designed to leave room for interpretation. Just the words, plain and heavy, laid out like stones on a table. The kind of sentence that doesn't need volume because the truth inside it is loud enough on its own. Then he lifted the sword higher. Our democracy, Schwarzenegger said, is like the steel of this sword. The camera tightened on the blade. Light caught the edge and sent a thin white line running along the metal. The more it is tempered, the stronger it becomes. He paused. Let the silence do its work. Let the image settle into the minds of everyone watching. The sword, the steel, the fire, the pressure, the strength that only comes from surviving the thing designed to break you. Our democracy has been tempered by wars, he said, by injustices, by insurrections. I believe, as shaken as we are by the events of recent days, we will come out stronger, because we now understand what can be lost. That wasn't just a speech. It was a warning, delivered not with the fury of a man trying to win a fight, but with the calm of a man who has already seen what happens when the fight is lost. Because Arnold Schwarzenegger grew up in Austria. He grew up in the shadow of a country that had surrendered its democracy to a strong man. He grew up surrounded by men who had been broken by that surrender. Men who drank too much, who carried guilt like stones in their pockets, who never spoke about what they had done or what they had allowed. He knows what the wreckage looks like. Not from textbooks, from kitchen tables and living rooms, and the silence of men who could never forgive themselves. And that is what made his words more dangerous than any insult, any attack, any shouted accusation on cable news. He wasn't performing outrage. He was speaking from memory. But before any of that, before the sword, before the speech, before the moment that broke the internet, there was The Apprentice. That is where this story really begins. When Donald Trump decided to step away from his reality television show, he needed a replacement, someone big, someone famous, someone whose name alone could keep the ratings alive. So he hired Arnold Schwarzenegger, the Terminator himself, the biggest action star of his generation, a man whose face had sold more movie tickets than most studios produce in a decade. Trump announced it the way Trump announces everything, like he was doing the world a favor. "We hired a big movie star," Trump said, grinning, chest puffed, voice soaked in that familiar self-congratulatory rhythm. "Arnold Schwarzenegger, to take my place." The audience clapped. The cameras flashed. Everything looked exactly the way Trump wanted it to look. Smooth, successful, controlled. Another deal, another headline, another moment where Donald Trump stood at the center of the frame and made sure everyone knew it. But then the ratings came in, and they weren't good. Now, in any normal situation, a reasonable person would look at the numbers, examine the context, consider the factors, and respond accordingly. Maybe the format was tired. Maybe the audience had moved on. Maybe the political climate had poisoned the brand. There were a dozen explanations, each one reasonable, each one supported by evidence. Trump chose none of them. Instead, he did what he always does. He blamed someone else. "I hired a big movie star, Arnold Schwarzenegger, to take my place," Trump repeated. But this time the tone had changed. The pride was gone. In its place sat something sharper, something smaller. And we know how that turned out. The ratings went right down the tubes. It's been a total disaster. He said this at a prayer breakfast. Let that sink in for a moment. A prayer breakfast. An event designed for reflection, unity, compassion, spiritual connection. A room full of religious leaders, community figures, people who came expecting grace and humility. And Donald Trump used that room, that microphone, that moment to mock a television show's ratings and attack a man who wasn't even there to defend himself. "I want to just pray for Arnold," Trump said, smirking. "If we can, for those ratings." The room laughed. Some of it was nervous, some of it was genuine. But all of it was uncomfortable, because everyone in that room understood, whether they admitted it or not, that something small had just happened in a place meant for something big. Arnold heard about it. Of course he did. The clip traveled across every news channel, every social media platform, every late-night desk in the country within hours. And when it reached him, he did something that revealed more about the difference between these two men than 1,000 op-eds ever could. He didn't explode, he didn't rage, he didn't fire back with the kind of scorched earth fury that Trump's attacks are designed to provoke. Instead, he smiled. "I have thick skin," Schwarzenegger said, and the way he said it made you believe it, not as a boast, but as a fact, the way you might say the sky is blue or water is wet. It was simply true. Then he delivered reality with the precision of a surgeon removing a splinter. "The show didn't do well," Arnold said, "because 1/3 of the audience boycotted it because you were the executive producer." He let that land. "If you hadn't said anything, we would have had great ratings, but advertisers left. The audience left. They hate the guy, so I was caught in the middle of that political thing." Notice the structure. First, deflect with humor, absorb the blow, show that it didn't hurt, then deliver the truth. Not with anger, not with insult, but with calm, undeniable, mathematically precise reality. The ratings didn't collapse because of Arnold Schwarzenegger. They collapsed because of Donald Trump's association. The poison wasn't the new host. The poison was the old one's shadow. And that pattern, absorb, then strike, became the blueprint for everything Arnold did next. Because Schwarzenegger didn't stop at The Apprentice. He didn't stop at defending himself. He widened the lens. He stepped back from the personal and looked at the system itself, the machine that produced men like Trump and rewarded the worst instincts of everyone around them. "For decades," Schwarzenegger said, his voice steady and tired in that particular way that comes from watching the same failures repeat themselves year after year. "We've talked about comprehensive immigration reform, but neither Democrats nor Republicans have any interest in solving it." The audience shifted. This wasn't what they expected. This wasn't a partisan attack. This was something broader, something that indicted the entire structure. "They use it to raise money," Arnold continued. "They point fingers at each other, and then they're surprised when people use their middle finger on them." The room cracked. Laughter mixed with recognition, that sharp, uncomfortable sound that comes when a joke is too accurate to be just a joke. Because Arnold wasn't defending one side. He wasn't attacking one party. He was describing a system that had failed everyone, a machine designed not to solve problems, but to profit from them. Then he sharpened it further with blunt symbolism that landed like a hammer on glass. "Think about the party symbols," Arnold said, leaning forward slightly, a faint smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "The Democrats, a donkey, a jackass. The Republicans, an elephant. And wherever a big animal goes, it leaves a pile behind." He paused. "The symbols say it all." The laughter that followed was different. It was exhausted. Not the sharp crack of surprise, but the slow release of people who were tired. Tired of the fighting. Tired of the posturing. Tired of watching two parties treat governance like a contact sport while the country crumbled between them. Arnold had named something that millions of people felt but couldn't articulate. That the problem wasn't just one man or one party. It was a culture of dysfunction so deep that even the symbols were a joke. But Arnold always came back to Trump, because Trump made it personal. Trump always makes it personal. And when Trump claimed he weighed 215 pounds, most people mocked it and moved on. Late-night hosts got their 30 seconds. Twitter got its memes. The news cycle chewed it up and spat it out within a day. Arnold didn't let it go that easily. "Hey, Donald," Schwarzenegger said, grinning now, that wide movie star grin that has disarmed interviewers and opponents for 40 years. "I have a great idea. Why don't we switch jobs? You take over TV, because you're such an expert in ratings, and I take over your job, and then people can finally sleep comfortably again." The room erupted, not just at the humor, but at the confidence behind it. Because Arnold wasn't just joking, he was drawing a line. He was saying out loud what millions of people thought in private, that the man in the Oval Office was better suited for a television studio, and the man on the television screen understood leadership more than the leader himself. Then came the weight. "If it makes him feel good to say 215, Arnold said, his voice dropping, the humor thinning out just enough to let the seriousness show through. "Everyone laughs." He paused. "It looks more like maybe 315. No shouting, no outrage, no table pounding or fist clenching or dramatic gestures designed to go viral. Just observation. Calm, measured, almost gentle observation. And somehow that restraint made it more cutting than any insult Trump had ever thrown at anyone. Because fury can be dismissed, rage can be written off as emotion, but calm with a smile, calm with facts, that is the thing that gets under the skin and stays there. And that is exactly what happened. Somewhere in the background of this dramatic retelling, Trump was already reacting. The phone was in his hand. The screen was glowing. The familiar fury was building behind his eyes, that tightening of the jaw, that narrowing of the gaze, that restless energy that turns a quiet room into a pressure cooker. His staff knew the signs. They had seen them 1,000 times. The pacing would start first, then the muttering, then the shouting, then the tweets. But Arnold wasn't finished. He had one more thing to say, and it was the thing that made everything else matter. He stood in front of that camera one last time. The sword was still in his hand. The light still caught the blade, and his voice, when it came, was quieter than it had been all night. "When I came to America," Schwarzenegger said, "Martin Luther King was assassinated. Bobby Kennedy was assassinated. There were riots because of the Vietnam War. Watergate followed. People kept asking, 'What is going on in America?'" He looked directly into the lens. "And we got out of that mess." The simplicity of it was devastating. No complicated argument, no intellectual framework, no carefully constructed rhetorical trap. Just history, just memory, just the plain, stubborn, undeniable fact that America has survived worse than this, that the country has been broken before and put itself back together, that the darkness always feels permanent until the light comes back. "America will always get out of this mess," Arnold said. And the way he said it, not with hope, not with optimism, but with certainty, the kind of certainty that comes from having lived through enough history to know how it works, made the room go completely still. That is what made Trump go crazy. Not the jokes, not the weight comments, not the ratings jabs. Those he could handle, those he could fight, those lived in the arena he understood. Insult, counter-insult, spectacle, noise. But perspective? Perspective was the one weapon Trump had no defense against. Because Arnold Schwarzenegger did not try to defeat Trump with anger. He did not try to match volume with volume or insult with insult. He used something far more dangerous. He used experience. He used the long view. He used the calm, steady, unshakable knowledge of a man who has seen what happens when democracy weakens, who understands how strongman rhetoric works, and who knows, from the bones of his own history, what it costs when good people stay silent. Trump called him a failure. Arnold called Trump irrelevant. "President Trump is a failed leader," Schwarzenegger said. "He will go down in history as the worst president ever. The good thing is that he soon will be as irrelevant as an old tweet." And that is the line that will outlast everything else. Not because it was the funniest, not because it was the sharpest, but because it named the one thing Donald Trump fears more than defeat, more than humiliation, more than losing: irrelevance. The pacing started. The shouting followed. The phone hit the desk so hard, the screen spiderwebbed into a constellation of cracks. The demands to know why anyone still listens to this man. The furious half-sentences that began with thunder and ended with nothing. The attacks, predictable, rehearsed, desperate, ratings, box office, age, relevance. Each accusation louder than the last, each one thinner, weaker, more transparent than the one before. The louder it got, the clearer the truth became. Because if the words meant nothing, there would be no reaction. If they had no power, there would be silence. But there was no silence. There was noise. There was fury. There was visible, undeniable, unmistakable strain. The response did not weaken the moment. It confirmed it. Every shouted word, every slammed door, every angry midnight post proved exactly what Arnold had said standing in front of that camera with a sword in his hand. By the end of the night, the screen no longer felt like a television broadcast. It felt like a mirror. And in that mirror stood two men, one built on noise and spectacle and the relentless performance of strength, the other built on steel and silence and the quiet understanding that real power doesn't need to shout. History will decide which one was right. And maybe that is the difference that truly matters. Not who shouts the loudest, not who dominates the headlines, not who fills the most rooms or fires the most insults or generates the most clicks, but who understands what is at stake. Because in the end, democracy is not destroyed in a single moment. It is tested over time, and only those with perspective know how to protect it. Power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stands still. Sometimes it picks up a sword and speaks quietly, and sometimes that quiet is the loudest thing in the room. If that moment hit you somewhere real, subscribe now. These stories are not just entertainment. They reveal how power actually works, how illusions get built, and what happens when one voice in one room decides to stand still and speak the truth while the whole world is shouting. Hit the bell, drop a comment, and whatever you do, do not miss what comes next.